Welcome back. So today we're going to be working in Photoshop. If you want to go pull that up, that'd be great. We have a file to download. So you're probably downloading that right now. The Photoshop icon is that blue icon. It says PS on it. I'm working at Photoshop 2023. Hopefully you're working in the same decade, or we'll be good. Other things to kind of hit on before we get cooking. Today, we need to be taking notes because we got a quiz coming up. A lot of this stuff is going to be a little bit step-oriented. It's going to feel a lot different than Illustrator at times. Some people are really intimidated by Photoshop. Some people love it more than Illustrator. But what we're going to be doing over the next couple demos is getting some skills for that upcoming project. We're going to be working in a lot of different layers, so we can start to build up a digital illustration, kind of working with industry standards, kind of masking things, separating out into different adjustment layers and transparencies. And I made this really dumb illustration really quick. I'm not sure what it's about. I had a stupid little drawing. It turned into this little guy. I don't know, folks. I'm tired. Anyways, so we're taking good notes. We're gearing up. We're getting mentally and spiritually ready to go deal with Photoshop for the first time. So let's do this. So if you could please go open up the image. You can go File, Open, or you can drag it out of Photoshop of that little drawing that I did. I did this on a scrap of paper. It's not the greatest drawing in the world, but it made me chuckle. So it's our demo today. So before we get too into Photoshop, we need to know the difference between working destructively and working with layers. So there's a lot of people that are used to, other programs, and they tend to work a lot in one layer, and they make edits in that one layer that, one, look kind of like garbage, and two, are destructive. Like, you can't go and fix them after a while. I mean, they might go get the paint bucket, they might go get the erasers and start erasing things, and they're working in one layer, which is going to cause some problems because eventually you're going to want to go edit something and you're not going to be able to because you've done everything in one layer. Okay, so that's called working destructively. What we're going to try to instill is setting up a workflow where we have multiple layers that are easy to go and adjust. So if you had to go do some revisions for me, as your teacher for the project, or if you had to go work for a client and they needed you to go switch out some colors, you could do it really easily without having to worry about, oh, can I go back in the history? Can I go hit Command Z, or there is a history, kind of like your internet history in Photoshop. You can pull that up and try to find where you messed up at. But if you work with layers and you work smartly, you don't have to have that stress and that worry of, I messed something up, now I have to go start all over. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working on multiple layers, trying to have good kind of industry standards as we're going, and life should be good. So first thing we need to do probably is go set up our workspace. I have a workspace that I use that's kind of slimmed down, that's more geared towards doing digital drawing and illustration work. You might have sat on a computer at school and somebody made that space all kinds of different. So let's try to get into a similar workspace. So if we could go to Windows, Workspace, and let's go to the Essential Default. Hopefully it looks all the same for us. I'm in 2023. I know some people are on the beta. Some people are stuck back in 2022. Who knows where we're all at, but hopefully it starts to look something like this. And you probably already noticed that Illustrator and Photoshop, they look kind of similar, right? So on the left, we have different tools. Some of them are the same as Illustrator, but in slightly different places. Some of them are quite different. We'll go over a majority of the tools. So as I click on them, that top bar changes just like in Illustrator. On the right, we're seeing things like our color, our swatches, and gradients. We got things like adjustment layers. I'm losing a thing, so I'm going to go reset my workspace one more time. There we go. We got adjustment layers. We got properties, just like in Illustrator. We have these libraries where you can like save things between Illustrator and Photoshop. You can save them on the cloud or in your account so you can pull them up quicker. So you can see some stuff I was working on in the past. And then down here we have not artboards, but we have our layers. So we just got one kind of layer for right now, our background that's locked. The layers are a little bit different in Photoshop. They're not all these subfolders. They're just one big stack of layers. And then you need to group those in folders. So it's slightly different. We have channels, which right now I'm working in RGB. So I can see that there is a red, a blue, and a green channel that I could work in and edit those colors. We'll get into that in a bit. We got paths. So if I did work with, there's a pen tool. If I was working with that, I could see those paths as well. So now that we know kind of how that workspace is going to go to, or how it's set up, we can also talk about some other things that we're going to see in the future, or be dealing with in the future. So if you do that drop down window for file, it looks all about the same as before. We could go to edit, and there's different ways of transforming stuff, very similar to Illustrator, but just some different tools. Then it starts to get quite different. We got image, we got layer, there's a whole type flyout window, selection stuff, filters, 3D. Yeah, you can do some basic 3D modeling. You can do animations in this program. It's pretty deep. There's a lot involved. But let's go to image, and we'll talk about some of the stuff there. So some of this stuff maybe not to do, and that's destructive, is there's some adjustments right here, and we can go click on those, and it will edit the color. It could edit the values, but that's going to be destructive if we do it this way through the drop down in the image, because it's not going to create a layer over here that we can edit down the road. Okay, so I'd say maybe a good rule of thumb is not to go and adjust those adjustments under that image panel. Sorry if that's a little confusing. The same adjustments over here. So if I do one, it pops up as a layer. If I do it over here, it's just going to do it to our one layer that we have. The same thing, there's all these auto functions, like we could do an auto contrast. When I did that, nothing pops up over here. So if I wanted to undo that, I'd have to go hit Command Z. I know that's really minor, but if you do a lot of work, at some point you could hit Command Z all day and you can't go back in time far enough to fix that issue. So I would recommend when we're going to do adjustments, which we are here in a little bit, that we're going to do them over here. So under image, not dealing with those adjustments, not dealing with the auto stuff. That's for noobs. Don't worry about it. What we're going to first talk about is dealing with the mode. So we have this color mode. Right now our color is in RGB. If we're going to go print it, we could go switch it to CMYK. But for right now, today, let's just go switch this thing to grayscale for a minute. Let's just see how that works. We're going to try to first edit some of the values. This thing's going to pop up. It's going to ask us if we want to discard our layers. We don't have any layers, so yeah, just discard it for right now. Okay, so we changed the image mode. You can do other things. You can make it like a halftone for screen printing. You can do a lot of things just by changing this image mode. Other things that people might have questions about is bits. So there's 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit. Depending on the project that you have, you might need more bits, which just means like a wider range of color. Wider doesn't always mean better. Some of the effects and filters start to max out after 16 bits. So I'm just going to stick with 8 bits for right now. Other things that we can deal with is we can adjust the image size. So if I go to image size, this window pops up, and I can go edit the size of my overall canvas. Okay, so in Illustrator, we're not working with those artboards like I might have mentioned. We're working with one image at a time, usually. There are ways of using artboards in Illustrator, or in Photoshop, my bad. It's quite new. They've only had it for a couple years. I tend not to mess with it because it hurts my head to start to use artboards in Photoshop after not using artboards for like 10 years. But anyways, if we want to change our image size, like changing our artboard, it's pretty easy. We go to this flyout window, we can go change the image size. So I'm going to go down to 3 inches wide. You can see it does 3 inches tall. It's pretty straightforward. There's a little kind of chain link icon right here. If I click off that, those two proportions will not be linked anymore. So if I do 4 inches, it's going to start to stretch it, and the height's not going to be adjusted. So just keep that in mind. You most likely want to keep that guy linked, okay? If you see that little link icon over here in your layers, which we will later today, sometimes you're going to unlink it to edit things in certain ways. But that's what that button does. It keeps two objects kind of linked together. Next up, we can deal with the resolution. So right now it's at 600. Let's just keep it like that for right now. We could make it smaller if we really wanted to. Something for the real nerds out there, the people that are going to get serious, I guess, at some point. There is this resampling thing that we could go and select. Right now it's just kind of set to auto probably for you, but maybe you need to go and shrink something down. Take an image that's really big, make it small. Maybe you need to go take something and it's a really high DPI and you need to go blow it up and put it as a billboard. We can change this resampling, which changes an algorithm in the software. So we could go change it to the first 3 deal kind of with enlargements. So they're going to make for more smoother transitions of those pixels as they get bigger or get duplicated. The next one is going to deal with reductions. It kind of says it there in parentheses. We have one for gradient, so if you got a lot of smooth kind of transitions of color, that might be really good for that one. The next one is nearest neighbor, so that's for really hard edge stuff. Maybe if you're doing like pixel art or something where it's like just blocks of color, or if you're doing like a halftone screen print kind of mesh, that's kind of what I use that for, where it's like either black or white. There's no in-betweens, and what it does is it just keeps those proportions the same, and you can make something really small and really big. But for the most part, you're probably going to keep it to automatic, but I know some people asked about that before, so I just wanted to kind of cover that. So I'm going to go down to 3 inches. I think that's what I said. I'm going to hit OK. Other thing we can talk about is we can go and change the size of this image another way to some degree. We're not changing the overall canvas, but we can't change the size of this one layer. We can go unlock it. It was a background layer. Now it says layer 0 after I unlocked it. So I'm going to start to edit it. I'm just going to go change it to just drawing so I know what it is in case I got, 100 things deep. And we can go and adjust the size of this. So I have the move tool selected. That's hotkey V. And I can go grab one of those corners and I can start to scale. Now, if you're used to Illustrator, you probably was holding down Shift when you were scaling to keep things in proportion. But Adobe's great, and for whatever reason, they decided that you don't hold Shift in Photoshop. So that's a little confusing. So in Illustrator, if you want to keep things in proportion, hold down Shift. Photoshop, if you hold down Shift, it's going to start to get all stretched on you. So just keep that in mind. I wish there was a way, maybe there is, I can go to my settings and change that, but it is a little confusing. Other things to kind of hit on, I want to try to cover all of our bases of things that we can mess up on before we get to the hard stuff. People sometimes freak out about that checkerboard pattern. And if you do see that in Photoshop, all that means is that it's going to be transparent. So if we're going to make a PNG, we want to see that transparent background. So we have that checkerboard. It's not going to print. It'll just print white, but that is the sign that you have transparency in there. Other thing too, this is going to happen a lot. You're going to make some edits, and if they are edits that might be more permanent, Photoshop's going to ask you up at the top, very quietly, you'll probably forget about it sometimes, if you want to confirm or deny those edits. So if you see, I moved it around a little bit, and up at the top of my bar, there is a no, kind of a stop cancel this transformation, or a check mark to OK this transformation. If I hit no, it's just going to go back. If I hit OK, it's going to stay down at those proportions. And I just want to bring that up because there's other things that you're going to do at times, and you're going to be confused why you can't edit things. And you're going to call me over, and I'm going to be like, you just need to confirm, and then you can continue. So if Photoshop's not letting you edit, one of the things to maybe check is that, do you need to confirm that thing? Okay. Super fun stuff. Let's continue with it. We're going to go back up to that image again. We've talked about image size. We can rotate this thing. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. You know, you can go rotate things that way. There's also canvas size. So if I wanted to make my canvas bigger, I can go to that. I can adjust the stuff by inches. I could adjust it by percent. And it's not going to make the overall image bigger. It's going to go make the stuff around the image wider. So that canvas is going to expand. And I can tell it to do that in certain directions just by clicking those arrows. So maybe go make it a little bit bigger so we can see some of these pixels. And then we're going to go crop it down from there. Okay. So make it a little bit bigger for me. And then if you haven't already, go and pull up your ruler, which is Command R. And then we're going to go pull up those grids, which was Command semicolon. No, Command parentheses. So I'm going to go pull up my grid. And let's go grab some of those guidelines, just like in Illustrator, and bring them about like 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of our kind of inked part of the drawing, just so we don't have so much junk around the edge. So I'm going to do this. I'm doing this just so when I go to crop, my cropping tool will just snap to these guides. You don't always have to do it, but I sometimes will do this just because it makes life a little easier. So I got those guides there. Next, I'm going to grab the crop tool. The hotkey for that is Command C. It looks like it's these little viewfinders. It's about, for me, it's 4 tools down, but it's Command C. Once I do that, I can go grab the edges of the canvas and I can start to bring stuff in. I can go and rotate, and it will rotate my image. That's one way of rotating. But I'm going to go crop it to the edges. Other kind of troubleshooting stuff to hit here in 1 sec is sometimes you're going to be having issues where the crop tool is working kind of weird. And it's probably because the last person that was on the computer used a different ratio. So right now it just says ratio. I could set a ratio. I could type it in here, so it needs to be 1:1. There's some auto ones, like you could set it so it always crops in a 4:5 ratio. It's kind of helpful if you're working in photography. But if you want to go more freeform, go back to just the ratio menu, and there's just that drop down up at the top left. Go hit the clear button, it'll clear stuff, and then you should be able to go do the freeform. This kind of messes up people sometimes when they're first starting. So if crop's acting funky, double check that you don't have somebody else's ratio up there. Okay. The next step, now that we've kind of got it all queued up to be cropped, you can go hit the check mark to OK it, or hit enter to confirm those edits. And then I'm going to get rid of these guides just by dragging them off the screen. And then we're going to really move on to the fun stuff. Sorry folks, that took a little bit, but we're just doing some housekeeping, trying to get ready for more complicated things. So we talked about color modes, switching from CMYK to switching from grayscale. If I go over my channels now, I just have one channel. It's just all gray. If I had CMYK, I would have one for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key for black. We talked about image sizing, canvas sizing. Hopefully all that was super simple, but not too boring. Next up, let's start to get to the fun stuff. We're going to start to make this image darker. We're going to adjust the values. You can see that it It's a pretty rough scan. I didn't do a great job scanning. It's on a piece of paper. You can see it's a little ripped. We need to make this look cleaned up. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to my adjustment layers. So let's go over from properties on the right. There's a button for adjustments. There are these new preset adjustments that Photoshop made. They're trying to make it more user-friendly to some degree, so your workflow is also a little quicker. These are sometimes for photographers, where they can do some editing a little bit faster. I don't typically use the presets because I got to do more fine-tuned edits, right? We got different adjustments after that, the single adjustments. I'm working in grayscale, so I have a couple of them grayed out, so I can't edit some of the colors. But the first one would be hue and saturation, so I could make things more saturated or less saturated. Another great one for color, which is blacked out, is our color balance, which I could help if I took a photograph, adjust it so the whites weren't blue or yellow. There's brightness and contrast. I'm going to click on that one. And you can see there's these sliders that pop up, which I can make things brighter. I can make them more contrasty one way or another. I don't typically use this one a lot. You could kind of mess around with it. As I make things darker, you can see that it's actually on the back of a piece of paper with some kind of diagram. Okay. Don't know what's going on there. But if you don't like one of these adjustment layers, what's really cool about working in this kind of workflow is you can just take them, select them, and click the little trash can in the bottom right, and they go away, right? Or you can just drag it down there. So I like to work with these. So if I do need to continue to adjust things, it's really easy. I'm not actually editing that layer. I'm editing the things that are on top of that layer. So another one, kind of used often by photographers is curves. So curves, we can go and edit the values. We could also edit those individual, red, green, and blue if it was a photograph taken in RGB. So we have these peaks and valleys we can see on this kind of graph. Curves, we have some eyedroppers too on the left. What you're going to do with curves is that middle line that goes from one corner to the next. If we add dots to it and we move them up or down, they're going to get lighter or darker in those value ranges. So up is going to go make things one direction, darker or lighter. Okay. There's some other tools in here you could use. You could use like the little different eyedroppers. There's one for establishing what's a dark black. There's another one for establishing what is the white. So you can try to do that to kind of speed up things a little bit. Usually when I'm working with my scans, I tend to not use curves as much. It's really good. You can fine tune stuff more, but I find it a lot easier to just go work with the next one, which is levels. So I'm going to click on this. It looks similar. On the left side of our little diagram here, there's a slider for the black values. So if I click on that, I can make my darker values even darker as I drag it to the right. On the far right, there's a slider for our light values. If I go and drag it to the left, I can brighten up some stuff. So you can start to see that my darks are darker. My light values, I'm starting to get rid of that paper tone. And then there's one for the middle gray too. I'm going to do that. So I'm trying to find something where my darks are pretty good, but I'm not making things overly dark, but I'm not losing too much detail with my whites. So maybe something kind of like that, maybe not. I think that's a little too dark. So sometimes it's good to kind of zoom in, see what we got going here. There's some other ways of editing this, which we're going to get into in a second. That's looking okay-ish. Not amazing, but for right now, looking good. So you can see kind of how I got it grouped up on mine. Some other things to kind of hit on too. One thing that's cool about the adjustment layers is we can copy those over to other Photoshop files. So I can have multiple projects up at once. Maybe you scan all of your textures and you want to use the same stats. So you could copy this level and go jump to the next file, paste it in there, and speed up your workflow by just copying and pasting the same effects throughout. Okay, so I went and adjusted those levels a little bit. I can see that I still need to do a little cleaning here and there. So let's go and do this. I'm going to go and make a new layer. I'm going to use that as my edit layer. So I'm going to go down to the bottom, hit the little plus sign to make a new layer, and drag that actually under my levels. I'm going to say this is my edits layer. And sometimes I'll make an edits layer because if I don't like an edit, I can erase that section of the edit, or I can just throw that layer away. What we're going to do next is we're just going to go kind of zoom around this drawing really quick. And if there's any big dots, any flakies that we don't like, we're going to go clean them up. And what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool. The hotkey is B. I'm going to go get a different brush. I got some shader brush right now. I'm going to go grab maybe one of the basic brushes. We can briefly talk about brushes while we're here. So in Photoshop, the brushes are different. They're not vector. They are, as I'm kind of zoomed in, I realize I need to get a little brighter. That's looking a little bit better. Okay. Our brushes, sorry about that. Our brushes are going to be putting down pixels. Okay. That's typically how they work, like a standard brush. Okay. So we can adjust the size of our brush. We can go kind of crank it down a little bit. I got just kind of the classic hard brush. We could adjust not only the size, but we can adjust the hardness. So we can soften up a brush. So make a line there. There's a nice hard brush. We can go soften that up so it's going to be more faded at the edges. If you're working with a Wacom tablet or something, we do have pressure sensitive brushes. I'm going to be doing that. So I'm going to go maybe grab our soft brush where it's pressure sensitive. I'm going to kind of bring it down to maybe something like 30 pixels or so. I'll maybe crank up the hardness to like in the 40s or something. And what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go have the white color selected. So down here we have our two colors. So in Illustrator there's a stroke and a fill. In Photoshop there's a foreground and background color. And there's a reason for that when it gets to masking, is that foreground and background color. Sorry about that. And you're going to need to kind of toggle between those two. So right now I have black selected. I could go to my swatches and pick white. But remember there's that button just like in Illustrator where you can go click and make it be black and white. Is that foreground and background? You can go hit that little over button to go switch back and forth between those colors, but the hotkey is, this is a good one to know, is X. So if I click on X, I can switch back and forth between those foreground and background colors. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to have my white. I might make my brush a tiny bit smaller. I'm going to kind of fly through here really quick. And any kind of little unwanted dots, I'm going to go and edit out. I'm going to just kind of clean up my drawing just a tiny bit. There's some dots here and there. And I'm doing this on the edit layer just in case if I didn't want to keep something, I can go and erase it. So I don't tend to use the eraser tool too terribly much actually in this program. I do in a way, we'll get to it down the road. I will take my paintbrush and turn it into an eraser. But I tend to kind of, because I've worked so long with masks and stuff, just use a paintbrush. So there's some tricks that you can do with a paintbrush that you can't do with the eraser in this program. I know, some of you are being like, what? He doesn't use the eraser? What a chump. It's the best tool. I love to erase and be destructive all the time. But yeah, I ran through it really quick, got rid of some of those dots that are kind of bugging me. Remember that X will take us back and forth between the white and the black. Other things we can do, if there's some areas that are still maybe they're not fully black, maybe they're not fully white. If we wanted it to look a little crisper, we can adjust from there. So I'm going to actually just hide my drawing layer just for a second and kind of zoom out. You can see that I kind of quickly ran through and kind of painted a few spots where there's some dots that I don't like. Okay, so we're going to do another tool. So we've been working with that paintbrush tool right there, but there's some other tools we could work with. So if we go from that paintbrush tool, we're going to go down to, there is a dodge tool and a burn tool. And I use this quite a bit when I'm editing kind of scans like this. So the dodge tool kind of looks like a lollipop. It's underneath, there's like a pointing finger tool. There's a paint bucket, but it's like a handful down. It's a couple above the type tool and the pin tool. So it looks like a lollipop. There's a burn tool that's kind of like a, I don't know, a hand making a circle type deal. There's also a sponge. We'll get to all that in a sec. So the dodge is going to make things brighter. The burn's going to make things darker. And the sponge is going to go make things more or less saturated. And these all come from developing photos in a darkroom. So I'm going to click on dodge. And what I'm going to do with dodge is I'm going to go through, and if there are some spots where there's still maybe some gray that I don't like, maybe on the outside, I can go and hit those really quick and lighten them up. There's not too many. One thing to kind of talk about, we can go at the top, we can select a different type of brush to work with. We can select what range we're working in. So right now I'm working in my highlights. If I wanted to make my shadows darker for whatever reason or lighter, I'm going to turn up my exposure. It's pretty low. I can go do that. And as I go scrub over it, my shadows get lighter. So you can pick what kind of color range you're working in. Okay. There's a few spots here and there where I see some crusties. They're gone now. Let's go switch from our dodge tool to the burn tool. So I'm going to go select the mid-tones as my range. I got an exposure that's kind of around 20. It's not too dark. I'm just going to go through. There's a few spots where it's kind of gray. I'm just going to go and kind of darken those up just because I don't want those to drop out when I do some other things down the road. Kind of in those kind of crude brush strokes that I did. So I'm going through kind of painting over those grays, making things a little darker. This is a super crude drawing. I kind of made this guy one night when I was cleaning off my brush. So, no idea what this drawing's about. Maybe I was bummed because I was done making art for the day. I had to go to bed. Being an adult. Okay, so I went and darkened up things. Things got a little bit cleaner in a few spots. Watch out not to get too dark. You can always go back if you get a little too dark with that dodge tool. If for some reason this isn't working for you, it's probably because you don't have the right layer selected, right? I'm working in my drawing layer. If you're doing that edit layer right now, I guess we've kind of slipped to being somewhat destructive. It's probably not working out for you. Okay, so make sure that we're selecting that layer if we want to edit it. Sorry, I think you all probably got used to that within Illustrator, but if you haven't, my bad. Make sure that we're selecting the layer over here in our layers that we want to edit. Okay, we've gotten this cleaned up. I'm just going to remind you one more time that dodge lightens, burn darkens, and we can click the different color ranges or the different value ranges in there. Now that we've gone and done that, we're going to work destructive for just 1 second. So I got all these layers here. If I was going to go and maybe do more edits to this, I might save a version of this with my levels and whatnot, just in case I had to go and do some stuff again, just so I wasn't saving over my scan. But what we're going to do is we're going to go and merge these down, and we're going to just have a little fun with this before we call this first phase of our photoshopping done for a day. So what we're going to do to merge, we're going to go back over to our layers. I'm going to go click on my top layer, and then I'm going to go hold down Shift and click on all the way down to the bottom layer. So you can see it selects everything in between. Another thing you could do is you could hold down Command or Control and go click on all the layers you wanted. So maybe I wanted the top one and the bottom one, but I didn't want the middle. You could do that. But I want to select them all because I'm going to merge them. And the easiest way to do this is Command E. That's the hotkey, or Control E. And it merges it all down. Okay, so now it's all one layer. So that was destructive, but hopefully you got it all looking good, or you saved a copy of it just to be safe. But we should be fine. Okay, so we're going to do some other stuff just real quick. We're going to talk about some blending modes. We're going to talk about selection tools, those types of things. Just so we got some more tools under our belt before we go to the next phase of this project, which is going to be a lot more complicated. So if you've been a little bit bored, I'm sorry. It's going to get a little bit more intense on the next one. So let's talk about selecting things. So in Illustrator, you go and you get that selection tool, you click on it. In this program, we can go select pixels, we can select areas, and then we can go edit those. So there's different types of selection tools. Let's go up to the tools. We have the Move tool. Okay. Underneath that, there's the Artboard tool, but just for right now, pretend that doesn't exist. We have these different marquee tools. So the marquees are these kind of dotted lines. If I go, I'm going to go down to the ellipse marquee just to kind of show you. I can go draw an ellipse. And then we get these dancing or kind of walking, marching ants that start to pop up, where the marquee, I like to just think of as ants that kind of marching around, but the marquee is like kind of moving, okay? So that area has been selected. So I could go take that area, I'm going to hit V for the Move tool, and I could go cut it out and move it because I've selected that area. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to hit Command Z. But whenever you see those dots moving around, whatever layer you're working on, you've selected that area to be masked, to be painted into, to be edited in some way. If you get those dots and you want to get rid of them, it's pretty easy. Although it messes people up all the time. The hotkey for this is Command D or Control D, and that's going to deselect it. Okay, so sometimes we're using other tools, such as the magic wand. We have just one pixel selected. You're trying to edit, but you're like painting, and you're like, it's not painting in these certain areas. And just kind of remember, sometimes you can select even just one tiny little pixel in this program, and you might not be able to see it. So one thing to kind of keep in mind, if Photoshop's not letting you edit things, maybe at the top, you need to confirm something, or maybe you got something really small selected. This is just one of those issues that everybody seems to have when they start off with this program. So remember, try Command D because you might have something selected. So we can use those marquee tools with the basic shapes. I rarely use those. We have the lasso. I like this one a lot, especially because I'm working on a tablet. So I got my Wacom or whatever, and I'm drawing with that. There's a couple different flavors of lasso we got. We have just a normal one where I can go draw. You can use your trackpad or mouse to draw. There is one that's polygon, so you can go kind of click and just make lines and select things. And think about these as a path too, just like in Illustrator. So you're going to always want to go back to the beginning of that path, and then it'll close it. I deselect that one. There's another one where there's like a magnet, and it should kind of like snap to different value ranges. I'm not going fast enough. Also, I could change some of my settings maybe, but it should be able to snap to things. It's not doing a good job of it right now. I don't use this one as much anymore. Noobs use this one when they first start out, but we got those points. We could go and adjust things too. If something ever does happen, you're using your thing and you can't get back to the starting point. You're like, oh no, I can't work. I've been using this thing. I don't know where it begins and ends anymore. Hold down Command, and then the little circle is going to pop up, just like you can close the path, and then click, and it'll connect it all together. Okay, so if you're ever using those lassos and get lost in the sauce, hold down Command and click, and it'll connect it together, and then you can go deselect. Other things about these lassos, I do use them quite a bit when I'm doing drawing, like maybe I'm trying to select an eye, and I just need to draw it out really quick. There's a couple different ways of using the lasso. Usually you got it selected. We go up to that top little selection bar, and you can see on the far left, we got the lasso, and then we got just one icon where there's a circle. So I'm going to be drawing once. If I draw again, it makes a new circle, okay? I tend to use, there's the one right to that where it's to add some. So if I need to go select something, I have the add some thing selected. The second one where we got these two overlapping circles or squares, and I can go draw a little bit more and draw a little bit more. So I can go, if I wanted to go, I don't know, make a mask or something of just this guy, I'd break him down into sections really easily. That's one way we could do it. If you draw too much, you can always hold down Alt or Option, depending on if you're on a PC. So maybe I wanted to select a whole, just that eye, I went a little crazy. I hold down Option or Alt, and I can go select a little less. I can cut into it. My plus sign turns into a minus sign when I have, and you can see up at the top left, those are switching when I'm going from option to not option. So just to kind of speed up your workflow, I usually have that version where you can add things. So I can go like select this whole guy and then paint inside of him or something. So that's another way of doing it. There's some other faster ways too. We'll continue to explore these as we're doing more kind of photo collage type work. I'm going to deselect stuff. So there is, if you hold down the next one, you probably got the object select. So we can go and drag over the whole thing, and AI will do the work for you, and it'll try to find the edges of stuff. So you can see that that marquee tool has now gone all around my guy. It's selected the outer edge. It's really easy to kind of work that way nowadays. Before you had to go use the magic lasso and other kinds of things, but now it's really easy to find those edges with that tool. I'm going to come back to that one. I'm going to deselect stuff. I'm going to talk about the other ones really quickly. If you do see that pink popping up, you've now AIified your thing, and now it's trying to find the boundaries. Don't worry about it. But other kind of ones, there's a quick selection, so you can kind of paint. These all do relatively the same thing, but you can kind of paint, and it's going to try to quickly select things. So maybe try that one out. Hopefully you're trying all these out just to see the different flavors. So we can kind of paint over stuff, and it starts to select it. There's also kind of a classic, the magic wand. So it's going to go try to select one kind of color that's connected, like so. Or I can go like continue to add on because I have that added function there. So let's do this. Pick your favorite. It could be the magic wand. I'm going to use that object select, and let's go and grab our guy. Just go over the whole thing so we can, ooh, sorry folks, I'm just going to grab the magic wand. AI is acting up today. Okay, let's just grab that background. So use our magic wand, use whatever. We're going to grab that background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and create a new layer. So I've selected the background. We can see we got the ants walking around the sides. They're walking around the edges of my drawing. So I'm going to make a new layer. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go and mask that layer. So we'll get more into the weeds about masks. There's a lot we can do with them. But the easiest way to make masks is if we go down, we see that there at the very bottom corner, right corner, is a trash can. We don't want to click on that. We can add a layer. We know that. We can group stuff. I think we probably got that figured out. We have our adjustment layers, which we could add them by clicking down there too. But there's this little rectangle with a circle in it. If we click that, we can make a mask. So I made a mask. How about I do this? Now that I've made a mask, you can see that over here in the layer, there's one box that's got those transparent checkers. There's a little link, just like when we had the resizing link. So we have that transparent nothing layer linked to a mask which has that shape in black and then the background in white. So we've created a mask. You probably got that mask selected right now. So go click on the transparent box. And what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go, and you could grab the paint bucket tool, but I'm going to go grab the rectangle tool. So yet again, I don't use the paint bucket a lot. It does this thing, it kind of annoys me sometimes when you go and click on it and it wants to spill out into different areas. So I'm just kind of used to using the rectangle. Just to kind of hit on this, the rectangle tool, it's probably set up to be a vector, just like in Illustrator. So if you go to click on the rectangle tool, if you go to the top of our bar here, you can see that there's a version that says shape. Go click on that. You can make it be just a path, but I'm going to make it be pixels if you want to go set this up. I kind of like working with this. There's some fun things we can do down the road, but I'm going to go pick a color. I guess this purple. I'm going to go drag my rectangle for the whole thing. And then I realized, oh wait, I'm actually in grayscale. So my purple just turns gray. So let's do this. Let's go hit undo for 1 second. I want to add a little color to this before we get out of here. So let's go back up to image mode. And let's switch from grayscale to CMYK. Now it's going to prompt us if we want to merge. Let's not merge. Everything will be fine. It's going to prompt us about this color settings. Right now, let's just hit OK. And let's go try to draw that rectangle one more time. Boom. Our background's kind of like a ugly looking purple. It's okay. I'm going to go make it a different color. I don't like that purple. It's kind of grossing me out. Make another rectangle. That's looking pretty good. We could do a little gradient. So underneath the paint bucket tool, maybe some of you using the paint bucket tool, there's some gradients. So we could go do a little gradient in that background. But the cool thing about this mask is that we're actually not editing our drawing layer. We are editing a separate layer in its mask. So I could go, I'm going to go click on the mask. I'm going to right click it. I'm just going to hit disable. Boom. So I've told that mask not to work for a second. And we have all this information that's being masked. And this will make probably more sense the more you do it. But if I go click on that mask again, it masks it up for me. And what I'm going to go do is do a few other things before we get out of here. Okay, I'm going to go drag my mask, or I'm going to go drag my whole layer of my gross looking gradient underneath my drawing. We're going to do a few other things. Some people kind of work in a way where everything's adjustment layers, everything's masked. So if they have to go send it off to a client and they're like, no, I need you to change this, it's very easy for them to change. This might be a workflow that you need for certain assignments. Sometimes when you're doing illustrative work, that file doesn't need to be as big. You might work a little bit more destructively. We're going to talk about that in the next project. But let's talk about a few other things. So I went and dragged my drawing on top of my gradient. And I can't see that gradient anymore. And there's a way of actually changing this drawing so I could see the gradient underneath if I wanted to. So let's do that. We're going to do that. We're going to change a few adjustment layers, just talk about color, and then we're going to call it for a day. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and adjust it so I can see that gradient again. So I'm going to go over to my layers, click on my layer of my drawing, and you can see right above it, it says normal. So if you go click that drop down, just like inside of Illustrator, if you go click on opacity, you can adjust those different blending modes. You can do this with inside of Photoshop as well. So there's all these different blending modes. Normal is the one that's usually set on. We can go to dissolve. Doesn't really do a lot. But we can see that there's these different sections. There's some that's going to be lightening stuff, some that's going to be darkening, some that's going to be doing these crazy effects. So if I go to darken, it darkens things up a little bit. If I go to multiply, what happens is everything that's a light value becomes more and more transparent. So white becomes transparent, black becomes opaque. There's some other crazy ones. There's like difference and stuff. It's probably not going to make too much of a difference right now, besides changing some colors, but just click on multiply. So now my whites are actually transparent. If I made a new layer and painted underneath my layer, you could go and see it. So some people work in this way where they might have one layer that is kind of like a line drawing, and then they start to build up the layers underneath of it as separate layers. So by using that kind of multiply feature, hopefully that's making sense. Other people will go and delete all the white out, you know, and be somewhat destructive. We're going to talk about that next time. Other things to maybe kind of hit on, you know, maybe have a little fun with this, maybe make it your own. Take a few minutes to do that here in a second. You know, you've probably been hunting around noticing that some of these tools are very weird. There's like a Band-Aid tool. You probably don't want to mess with that today. There is a pen tool, just like before. I'm going to give my guy a little hat. I'm going to make a new layer. That's going to be my hat layer. He's going to have a stupid little party cap or something. So we got a pen tool. It's just the same as Illustrator. There's no smooth tool, unfortunately. There's a select tool. There's a direct select tool. All that's pretty much the same. So if you did want to go like for your illustrations and go draw some shapes, maybe you want to go take your drawings and then or your sketches and go trace on top of them with the pen tool, you can go do that. That's an option. We can use those adjustment layers, and this will be the last thing to change the colors. So I'm going to do one more adjustment layer, and then we're going to call it. Hopefully this is pretty easy, pretty breezy. Hopefully you don't look like this guy all grumpy at me. But let's go to adjustment layers. So I'm going to show you one more adjustment layer that sometimes I use, which is the gradient map. And what I'm going to want to do is I want to take my drawing layer, which has black line, and I want to change it to something else. Okay, so I'm going to go click on my drawing layer. I'm going to go click on gradient map. And what that does is it's going to make a effect on everything that's below it. So it's going to make everything below it a different value. We can see that happening. If I want that layer to go and be, or that adjustment layer to just be interacting with just one layer, I'm going to put it on top of it like I did for the drawing. So if I do it to the hat, does it to the hat. Let's get rid of that hat. It's stupid, by the way. If you like your hat, you can keep it. Okay. But I'm going to have my adjustment layer right above my little drawing layer. Okay. And then if I want it to go and just affect that layer, there's a really easy way to do that. And that is to go, and if you go to that properties of that adjustment layer, there's a trash can. And again, don't click on that, but we all know where the trash can is for that adjustment layer. And then if you go all the way to the left, there's like a little box with a little arrow that's pointing down that has a cross through it. And this will only affect the layer below it. Okay, so I did that. How about I go and click on my gradient? I'm going to change the black to, I don't know, this is looking atrocious. Another color. Now it's really transparent, so now it's kind of seeing those eyes behind it. But you could go play around with that a little bit. But that's one way of kind of breaking that workflow out, where everything's just kind of adjustment layers. And so hopefully we've kind of got an understanding to some degree. We haven't done a lot. We literally just cleaned up a dude and we put some color on it. But we could work in a way where everything was individual layers that we could delete really easily. So I'm going to delete my background layer. I'm going to delete my color layer. And nothing happened to my guy. Okay, so if you could do this really quick, just delete all that stuff besides our guy. Our guy's one nice little layer. We're going to bring him into the next thing and go from there. Hopefully that was making sense. Some people like to work like that, where they stack a bunch of different adjustment layers up, a bunch of masks. We're going to talk about working slightly more destructively next time. You probably will all like that a little bit more, but it's not as user-friendly. But those are two different kinds of flavors that we're going to cover. So save this guy, And let's talk about saving. So we're going to save this guy for right now as a Photoshop file, right? So I'm going to go save it as a Photoshop file, but I'm not going to upload that because I'm not going to be able to see it. But really quickly, go File, Save As, just like before. We're going to hit Save for Photoshop, hit OK. Life is good. And let's go save this also as a JPEG. So we're going to go File. And there's this new feature now. There's Save As, and that's only going to be for files that have layers that are quite large. So we can do a Photoshop file, we can do a large format document, we can do a Photoshop PDF, and we can do a TIFF, okay? So there's this problem that happened before in Photoshop when you would go to save. So you would save a JPEG, and then you would need to go save another version, but you would often save over your previous one, and people kept on doing this. So Photoshop separated it out. So you can save a Photoshop file by doing Save As, or you can go save a copy, and it's going to pop out a new window. And now I can go save it in all these different file types. These are some of the basic ones. You can go to a lot more, but I'm going to go save it as a JPEG for right now. Title it up your name or whatever. We're going to hit save. Another window is going to pop up. We got this slider. I'm going to go take it to the max. Let's go up to 12. Nice big large file, and we're going to hit OK. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind. I would write it down right now before you forget. But we got File, Save As, we'll save it as a Photoshop file or a PDF. Save a Copy is going to go save it as all the other file types that are out there. Okay, and there's even more. You can get rid of it for layers, and you can go do PNGs and all other kinds of things. A little tricky, but once you get it, it actually saves you a lot of headache because you often save over your files in the past, and it was a pain. Okay, folks, so the main things that we hit on for this demo was we did some resizing. We did a lot of that. We went and we worked with our adjustment layers, especially working with levels, and kind of adjusted those values. We cleaned up stuff with that burn and dodge. So just to kind of hit on this, just to solidify a little bit more. And then we merged stuff down. Once we got all of our stuff nice and cleaned up, we merged it down by selecting all the layers we wanted and hitting Command E. Okay. So next time we're going to take our drawing in. I know we did a lot over this half an hour or whatever. And we're going to get really going, and we're going to be adding a bunch of color and going from there. Okay. Okay, so hopefully that all made sense, and I'll see you on YouTube soon.